Well, good afternoon, and thank you, everybody, for being here. We are most delighted to have this opportunity today to talk about an update on the collaborative effort that's been underway for many years to deal with the backlog of untested sexual assault kits and the underlying circumstances that had led to that, not only in Kansas but around the country. I'm Derek Schmidt. I have the privilege of serving as Attorney General. Let me say just a few words about the status, and then I'll introduce the rest of the folks who are up here in front with us. I have to say I am very proud of the proactive effort that the Kansas Bureau of Investigation initiated early on, and I recall discussions prior to the 2014, I think, official kickoff of the SAKI initiative with Director Thompson when we talked about what was obvious around the country, that there was a need to deal with the what we suspected were backlog of untested assault kits in different local jurisdictions around the state. And I remember one of the early conversations where the director made clear, and I certainly agreed, that the Kansas way to approach this was in a collaborative manner. Not in a sort of high profile, issue a news release and declare this is what must be done, but instead gather in a room, literally or metaphorically, the people who have a stake in this, who have knowledge on what needs to be done, and let's figure out how to fix this problem. And I believe that what we're able to report on today is a very positive outcome of that, I think, very common sense approach, and I want to express my personal gratitude to everybody who has worked as part of the working group or otherwise has been involved in identifying the problem and then fixing the problem once it's been identified. Kansas is the first of the states that received a Bureau of Justice Assistance SAKI grant to complete the project of identifying and causing submission of all of the reports. That's under the original 2015 grant. The KBI is committed to inventory and ensure that all SAKI kits in the state are tested. And I believe we are at a point now where about 2,200 kits were identified in law enforcement jurisdictions throughout the state of Kansas that had not been submitted. All of those kits that can be submitted have been submitted. And it's my understanding that we are within a very small number of having all of them actually tested by the forensic scientists here at the KBI. And the expectation is that all submitted kits, thanks to these dedicated folks over here, will be submitted by the end of this month, or will be tested by the end of this month. The results have been positive, if you can say that in this context. We are one of only 2 states that has been able to conduct all of the testing on the backlog kits in-house without the need and other associated dynamics that come along with going out into the private marketplace and hiring professional scientists to do the testing. And I think that's a real positive for the state. The data as of September 30th, which is the snapshot I can share with you today, is that the kits tested to date have resulted in 234 CODIS hits. You can consider each of those hits an investigative lead for purposes of understanding what that means. There have been 4 prosecutions initiated as a direct result of the SAKI project. We still have a number of cases that are pending review. Kansas is a local jurisdiction state for prosecution purposes, so it is local prosecutors around the state who have to review and assess that evidence in the context of their prosecutorial authority, and a number of those reviews are still underway. There have been 271 victims served by SAKI-funded staff through both the Office of Attorney General and the Kansas Coalition for Sexual and Domestic Violence. So 271 people who have received support as a result of this initiative. So I think this is overall a very positive story. Let me introduce the folks who are going to be sharing some more details with you here in the next few minutes. On my immediate left is Director Kirk Thompson. Director Thompson has served as Director of the Kansas Bureau of Investigation for the past 8 years, and as I suggested earlier, it was under Director Thompson's leadership that this, I think, unique and very positive collaborative model was developed. Next to Kirk is Kathy Ray, who is the Director of Advocacy and Education for the Kansas Coalition Against Sexual and Domestic Violence. KCSDV generally, and Kathy in particular, are consistently fierce advocates for the needs of sexual assault victims, and we are most grateful for your leadership in this area. And on the far end is Katie Wisman, who is the Executive Officer at the KBI. Katie has been the tip of the spear, so to speak. She has led the Kansas SAKI project and has coordinated efforts of the multidisciplinary working group and is responsible for Kansas having been one of the first 20 BJA-funded SAKI sites in the nation. So with that general framework, let me turn this over to Director Thompson, and thank you all for being here.
Good afternoon. Five years ago, as local jurisdictions across the country began to find police property rooms and police warehouses filled with unsubmitted rape kits, the KBI began a proactive statewide evaluation in Kansas to see if we had a similar problem. Now, not believing that we would have that problem, but knowing it was the right thing to do, I requested a comparison of statewide crime reports to the number of sexual assault kits that were submitted into the forensic laboratories. That comparison, unfortunately, revealed that we weren't immune to the concerns that existed in other jurisdictions. After a very long and arduous process, we identified 2,200 unsubmitted sexual assault kits in law enforcement property rooms across the state. And while doing so, we became the first state in the country to complete that inventory of sexual assault kits with 100% voluntary law enforcement compliance. During the project, we facilitated the submission of over 2,000 sexual assault kits to the forensic laboratory for analysis. And it's been a significant undertaking for the scientists in the KBI Forensic Science Center and the Johnson County Criminalistics Laboratory to eliminate that unsubmitted backlog while managing their regular casework in such a way that it wouldn't impact incoming current cases. Because of our leadership role in the public safety community, it was important for us to initiate the Kansas Sexual Assault Initiative and to create a collaboration with key stakeholders to develop and implement a statewide strategy to help solve these crimes and prevent additional victimization. Now, to do that, we brought together a number of experts and formed a multidisciplinary working group that was tasked with identifying and evaluating barriers to kit submission and testing. When we committed to eliminating the backlog, I believe that the problem was defined by a number. That number of additional kits that were located that we needed to have tested. But as time and hard work would reveal, those issues were much deeper. And through their unwavering dedication, the working group determined the causes of the evidence accumulation that we were concerned about were a broad lack of training, resources, policy guidance, and a pronounced lack of societal awareness as to the issues surrounding sexual assault. Since releasing their findings and recommendations, this group of experts pulled together and found ways to truly initiate change. The results of their efforts have been far greater than ever imagined, both in breadth and in depth. While the accomplishments of the SAKI project and the work of the SAKI team have been numerous over the past few years, I'd like to highlight just a few of the most significant things that have happened to date. So together, we've identified and tested nearly 2,000 sexual assault kits and transitioned those laboratory results back to our local law enforcement partners for further action. We've conducted unique research demonstrating the staggering extent to which sex offenders commit other major violent crimes. We've developed and delivered training to over 1,300 Kansas criminal justice and victim advocacy professionals. We've developed webinar-based trauma-informed sexual assault investigations training for continuing education of law enforcement and other professionals in the field. We've developed and disseminated model policies for sexual assault investigation and for sexual assault exam evidence submission retention to Kansas law enforcement agencies. We've modernized the standard Kansas sexual assault evidence collection kit that's used in hospitals across the state. And we've made a formal recommendation to the Kansas law enforcement community that all sexual assault kits that are collected be submitted to a forensic laboratory and tested. Together, we've improved the criminal justice system's response to sexual violence through increased awareness and training, policy development, and by adding critical resources to the forensic laboratory system. As a result of those efforts, Kansas has been cited as a model for statewide reform. Now, we began down this path with some fairly lofty goals to include the utilization of science and technology to help identify serial offenders and help solve cases, to enhance victim services and support, and encourage the reporting of sexual assault cases, and to hold offenders accountable and reduce victimization. Because of the outstanding collaboration of the group of individuals that's seated off to my left, we've accomplished each of those things and many more. And let me close by emphasizing this, that while we virtually eliminated the unsubmitted rape kit backlog in Kansas, it's not necessarily that has made this project so important. What makes the project profound is the strong cross-disciplinary relationships and partnerships that have developed, the work that's been done to help past crime victims, the systematic changes that have been put in place that will improve the experience of future victims of sexual assault, and the significant improvements to the criminal justice system's response to crimes of sexual violence. Thank you, and I'd next like to bring Kathy Ray from the Kansas Coalition up for some comments.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Director Thompson. Good afternoon. My name is Kathy Ray, and I'm with the Kansas Coalition Against Sexual and Domestic Violence, or KCSDV. KCSDV is a state-level nonprofit organization with 26 members, and our member programs provide direct advocacy services to victims and survivors of sexual assault, domestic violence, and stalking in local communities throughout Kansas. We are thankful for this much-needed, long overdue work in Kansas, and for KBI's leadership and partnership in these efforts. Because of the work under SAKI, the KBI was named 2019 State Level Ally of the Year by KCSDV. That award was presented to them in July by our Executive Director, Joyce Grover. Joyce, if you'd please raise your hand. I'd also like to acknowledge Joyce for her leadership and support for these efforts in Kansas. I had the privilege of serving on the multidisciplinary working group formed by the KBI to address previously unsubmitted sexual assault kits in Kansas. As Director Thompson indicated, we were committed to understanding the reasons that occurred. In doing so, we spent a lot of time discussing the importance of understanding the impact of trauma on victims of sexual assault and the need to overcome rape culture in our society in order to prevent victimization. It is time that these same conversations become commonplace among all of us. Modern research tells us that people who are victims of rape and sexual assault experience trauma that causes actual physiological changes to a person's brain. These changes impact memories, behaviors, emotions, and abilities to recall details of the assault. The experience of rape trauma is never forgotten. Victims endure lifelong journeys of healing, and our responses can either help them or hinder them. Unfortunately, our failure to understand trauma and its impact on a person's brain has led to many missed opportunities, not only for victims, but for safety and justice. In the past, responses to sexual assault have been uncoordinated, which created a disjointed and chaotic system for victims to navigate, often on their own and without support. Over the years, this has resulted in a lack of engagement by victims in the criminal justice system, lessening the opportunity to hold offenders accountable for the crimes they have committed. Conversely, when the physical, emotional, and psychological safety needs of victims are tended to, it strengthens their capacity to recover from the traumatic effects of rape and sexual assault and increases their participation throughout the investigative process. Ultimately, this improves criminal justice case outcomes, meaning more offenders are held accountable and additional victimization is prevented. The Kansas Sexual Assault Kit Initiative has centered the value of involving advocacy and coordinating a trauma-informed response to victims of sexual assault. This means expressing empathy. We are patient and respectful, and we recognize the importance of saying to a victim, "I'm sorry this happened to you. Thank you for having the courage to share that with me. What can I do to help you?" Because of SAKI, we are changing the responses victims can expect in Kansas. Now, we need to work together to overcome rape culture in our society. Rape culture includes an abundance of myths about sexual assault that impact the way we, as individuals and as a society, think, feel, and respond to sexual assault. I'd like to share with you a short video segment from the Trauma-Informed Sexual Assault Investigations training that was developed through this project. In the context of sexual assault, imagine that a victim has sexual assault evidence collected, is connected with a victim advocate, makes a report to law enforcement, and then a prosecutor files charges against the offender. Every part of the response is coordinated and trauma-informed. But a jury failing to understand the victim's actions before, during, and after the assault does not convict. Unfortunately, this is a common occurrence, and it's not one that can be corrected by the system alone. It requires better awareness and understanding among the general public as well. I'd like you to imagine yourself at the ATM late at night, dressed in a nice suit. As you withdraw cash, you are robbed. In total shock, you don't fight back. You're not even really sure what just happened. How would you feel if, when telling a friend or the police, you were asked, "Why were you dressed in a nice suit when you went to the ATM late last night?" What did you think would happen? This seems absurd, doesn't it? This response, when contrasted against another crime, seems insensitive and even disrespectful to the victim of the crime. Yet with rape, a major violent crime that leaves devastating and long-lasting impacts, this response is commonplace. Victims are wrongly blamed while offender behaviors are rationalized. Through the Kansas Sexual Assault Kit Initiative, we have come together with a commitment to improve our responses through increased awareness, training, education, and collaboration. We are thankful for the work that has been done and are excited for the opportunity to engage all Kansans in conversations about how we can work together to overcome rape culture and improve the responses that victims of sexual assault and rape can expect in Kansas. It is my pleasure to now introduce and welcome Katie Wisman, Executive Officer for the KBI, to the podium.
Thank you, Kathy. As Kathy mentioned, my name is Katie Wisman, and I have the privilege of serving as the Executive Officer at the Kansas Bureau of Investigation. For the last 5 years, I've overseen the Kansas Sexual Assault Kit Initiative and the multidisciplinary work that has been, group that's been so instrumental to the work done here in Kansas. Through SAKI and research that we conducted, we became keenly aware of how infrequently sexual perpetrators were held accountable for the crimes they commit and how often they go on to commit additional acts of sexual violence. We quickly realized because of this that increasing offender accountability also required the involvement of the general public, and the idea for a statewide public awareness campaign was born. National statistics reflect that of 1,000 sexual assaults committed, less than 250 are reported to law enforcement. And of those, less than 50 lead to an arrest. When an arrest does occur, less than 5 individuals out of that 1,000 ever end up incarcerated. From research that we conducted under the SAKI project, we determined that 907 of the 1,308 suspects that we had named associated with these cases had a criminal history. 93% of them had committed other acts of violence, such as stalking, domestic battery, assault, and murder. Collectively, those same suspects committed over 7,000 additional crimes, many of which occurred right here in Kansas. When you realize that those same offenders may victimize someone you know or someone you love, it becomes personal. I want to ask everyone in the room to do something courageous with me. If you know someone who has been affected by sexual assault, please raise your hand. We have just demonstrated the hallmark of this campaign, that sexual assault affects all of us. Our families, our classrooms, our citizens, and our communities. Sexual assault affects people you know, people you love, and people in this room. In fact, 1 in 5 Kansans will experience sexual assault at some point in their life. But we don't have to accept that. And by overcoming the rape culture that Kathy talked about and focusing on the actions of the offender, we will prevent additional crimes from occurring. And together, with your help and the help of the public, we believe we can do that through the Yes, This Room public awareness campaign. The KBI used federal grant funding to commission the development of this unique statewide public awareness campaign that is focused on educating Kansans about the realities of sexual violence. It has been a privilege to work with the Bajillion Agency, a small business from right here in Topeka, to make this long vision become a reality. You've just seen one of 2 30-second public service announcements that we created as part of the campaign. And beginning today and continuing through the end of 2019, these will be broadcast along with other campaign material on traditional, digital, and social media platforms. We will be distributing posters, as you see here, to over 1,100 entities across the state of Kansas. Every hospital and health department, public library, community college and university, law enforcement agency and prosecutor's office, and advocacy organization across the state will receive a packet of campaign material with instruction on how to best utilize it. Buttons will serve as conversation starters and encourage students on campuses to engage in courageous conversations. We have also created a unique website, yesthisroom.com. Here, people can find out information and educate themselves about the realities of sexual assault and also access a toolkit that we've created with 4 conversation guides to address the specific needs identified by parents, educators, and medical providers. These guides will encourage everyone to engage in courageous conversations about sexual assault. And we are very excited to announce that all of our campaign material, even the website, has been developed and will be distributed in both English and Spanish languages. The Yes This Room campaign is a public call to action. Sexual assault thrives in silence. Rather than turn away from an uncomfortable reality, we are asking everybody to acknowledge that it happens and it affects the people in the rooms that you're in every aspect of your day. By educating ourselves on the facts and challenging our beliefs about victims, offenders, and the way that these crimes are committed, we can engage in healthy dialogues that challenge the problematic behaviors and speech that promote rape culture and encourage others to do the same. The health, well-being, and vitality of Kansas depends on a zero-tolerance response to sexual violence. Having courageous conversations and challenging rape culture will take the hard work and conviction that we know all Kansans possess. Together, we can overcome rape culture. Together, we can better serve victims of crime and focus on offender accountability. And when we do that, together, we will prevent additional victimization and make our Kansas communities safer places to live, learn, and work. Thank you. In closing, I want to thank a couple groups. First of all, I want to thank everybody who has taken the time to be here today, and especially thank each of the agencies and associations that has so far pledged their support of our campaign. If you haven't done that and you wish to do so, we invite you to fill out a pledge card before you leave today. They can be found outside on the table. I also would be remiss if not acknowledging the support of the Department of Justice and the Bureau of Justice Assistance for the support and funding that they have provided to us. We would not have been able to accomplish what we did in Kansas without their financial support. Lastly, but most importantly, I want to acknowledge two particularly important groups of people. First, to each of you from the KBI Forensic Science Center and the Johnson County Criminalistics Laboratory. You worked tirelessly to test about the amount of kits that was equal to more than 5 times what we typically see in any given year. And I know it took a lot of hard work. It put a lot of pressure on you all, but you handled it professionally, you worked at it diligently, and we could not have done this work without you, so thank you very much. And to the men and women who volunteered their time to the Sexual Assault Kit Multidisciplinary Working Group, I am so humbled by your dedication to this project. I have greatly appreciated your professionalism as we have worked together to have our own difficult conversations about how we can improve our responses to victims and improve the people that we have sworn to protect. Thank you for what you do each and every single day for the citizens of Kansas. It has been such an honor to work with you, so thank you. I'd like to just give those two groups a round of applause if you would join me in that. So we do have time for a couple questions from our media partners. Yes.
Haley Harrison, KBC in Kansas City. We heard Director Thompson mention some of the standards, reforms, policy changes that came as a result of this, and I'm wondering if you could give us some of the more meaningful changes that came out of this and be more specific about some of the results.
Sure. So we did 2 model policies. One is a model policy for sexual assault investigation. It carries through all of the trauma-informed response, and it really encourages more training and the involvement of advocacy very early in the investigative process because, as Kathy mentioned, research demonstrates that when we are able to involve advocates to address the physical, emotional, and psychological needs of the victim, make sure that they're safe, and help explain the criminal justice processes, they stay engaged in that process much longer, and it improves criminal justice case outcomes. So the policy that we developed really focuses on that trauma-informed response at every level, from patrol clear through the chief administrator at a law enforcement organization. The other model policy that we created was dealing with sexual assault evidence kit collection, retention, submission, and destruction or disposal. So as Director mentioned, we have made a formal recommendation that all kits collected be submitted to the laboratory and tested, and then we gave some guidance in terms of retention after that so that we're complying with statute of limitations and not destroying evidence too quickly. So,
among these 2,200 kits that were part of this, what was the oldest?
The oldest kit was collected in 1989.
And then can you also speak to more specifically, I know that it was touched upon, but can you also speak more specifically to why the rape kit backlogs exist? I know that is a complicated answer, but could you do your best?
Yeah, so with this group, we spent 2 years really digging in deep and trying to identify all of the underlying issues So certainly lab capacity was an issue that contributed to the accumulation. Lack of training, lack of trauma-informed training, lack of multidisciplinary collaboration and understanding our various roles. Those were two of the significant findings. There's a lot of detail there, but we summed it up by saying that we identified 4 core factors, all of which were interrelated, if you will. So lack of policy, lack of training, lack of resources, and lack of societal awareness. And so the training, resources, and policy are issues that affected each of the disciplines we represented in various ways. So we do have a more detailed publication on our website that you can find to answer additional questions. I think I'm going to go to somebody else real quick. Yes?
Yes, can you give an example? I mean, each of these kits that wasn't submitted was the result, presumably, of the decision not to submit it. Can you give some examples of maybe societal, you mentioned societal knowledge being lacking in a decision not to submit a kit? What would be the example of the thinking of not submitting?
So sexual assault is one of the most difficult crimes to investigate and one of the most difficult crimes to prosecute. There are a number of reasons for that. When we identified all of these kits, we went through a process of researching a small portion of them to better understand the reasons that they were not being submitted. So some of that, again, had to do with lack of laboratory capacity. In issues where there was a consent defense between a suspect and a victim, that had historically been a way of managing laboratory resources, because proving DNA in that case is not necessarily going to solve it if both people agree that they had a sexual encounter. We now know that it's very important to test all kits, because with science and technology, we have the opportunity to link cases together and to link offenders to cases. So there were a variety of reasons that these kits were not submitted, and again, that's detailed in documentation on our website. Yes?
Have you been able to hear from any of these victims, after even some years, now getting results?
We have had a handful of cases, as the general mentioned, that have progressed onto prosecution. And with the system-based advocate that we placed at the Attorney General's office under SAKI funding, there were a handful of cases in particular that the re-engagement of those victims using a protocol that we developed that was trauma-informed and based on research-informed findings from Detroit and Houston, that we were successful at re-engaging those victims, and in a couple of cases successfully prosecuted offenders who would have never otherwise been held accountable absent the efforts of this project. So that's a very rewarding thing, to be able to have a victim say thank you for the work that you do, and get them justice after so many years.
And so all of this testing that we're talking about, the backlog, was done either by the KBI's lab or the lab, the Johnson County lab?
That is correct. Yes, the Johnson County Forensic Laboratory assisted us. They were a sub-grantee, so we provided them some federal funding to help us address the backlog. I will say in both, some people have asked, why did it take so long, and why are you not done yet in testing those kits? Laboratory resources are a hot commodity, and they don't come for free. We were very intentional about not impacting current cases, and so we didn't want to clog the system with this backlog of old cases. So for that reason, both labs committed to do this with utilizing the forensic scientists that we do have, and accomplished all of this testing on overtime status. So this was all done over the course of 4 years in addition to their normal work.